All right, we're going to go ahead and get started now. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. This is Rob Love with Love and Company. And I think we have a really exciting topic today that will bring a lot of benefits to a lot of organizations. Our title is Beyond Our Walls, Opportunities for Expanding Life Plan Community Services. This is one of the key things that I hear in boardrooms and management team meetings is what other revenue sources can we look at and explore, to broaden our base of income and margin for our communities. I think we'll have some great ideas shared today. Before we launch into that, let's just cover a couple of logistics. The first is we will hold all the questions until the end. So you are able to ask a question anytime, and we'll compile those questions as we go. And you do that by going to, you'll see at the bottom, as you see in the picture here, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little box that says Q&A. If you click on that, it will open up a little dialog box for you in which you can type in your question and then submit it. And it will come to the group that is moderating the technical side of the webinar for us today. And when we get to the end, they will forward the questions to us and we'll be able to respond to them at that point. So please feel free to ask questions at any point. Also, the most frequent question we always get is, can I get a copy of this? And the answer is, we will send out a full recording of the presentation to everybody that participated today and to everybody who registered and was not able to attend. So we really like to get this information out to as many people as possible. When you get that link, you're welcome to share it with other people in your organization. So the plan for today, we're going to start with introductions of our speakers and their communities and organizations. But I just want to say, I shared this with the speakers just a couple of minutes ago, I'm about as excited for this presentation today as I've been for any of our webinars. We've had some really experienced speakers on a wide variety of topics over the past several years. But Ben and Nancy and Kevin, I think they're really going to be bringing a lot of information to you today that your communities are going to be able to take action on this year, next year, to really lay a foundation for a solid additional revenue stream or two for your community. So I'm very thankful that they have joined us for this and they've contributed their time to sharing their thoughts, ideas, and experiences with all of you. We're going to start after the introductions and spend a little bit of time on home and community-based services. Then we're going to switch to early advantage programs that each of our guest speakers have run. And then we'll just close with some very broad thoughts from each of our three panelists on when they look to the future, what other ideas and opportunities do they see for generating revenue streams beyond the bricks and mortar of our community? And then we'll end with a Q&A period. So with that, again, I'm Rob Love. I'm the president and owner of Love and Company. If any of you are not that familiar with Love and Company, we are a marketing, sales, research, and creative firm that specializes solely in senior living and helping communities plan for their futures and then bring that future to life through successfully planning and marketing expansions in startup communities. So really pleased again with our guest panelists today. And Ben, could you introduce yourself?
Whoop, won't make that mistake again today. My name is Ben Uncle, and I am the CEO of Westminster Canterbury and Chesapeake Bay. We've got a life plan community, hospice agency, home health agency, home care agency, and we help manage others, as you'll learn about later, help advise and get other people started in this. And that's Westminster, and that's me. I've been in the industry now for about 26 years.
Great, thanks, Ben. Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy King, and I'm a president of Senior Options, which is an LLC of Westminster Canterbury on Chesapeake Bay. And I'm also president of Westminster Canterbury at Home, our local home health, hospice, and home care agency. And I've been fortunate enough to be here nearly 7 years and have been in the industry longer than Ben.
Great. And Kevin.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, everyone, I should say. My name is Kevin McLeod. I'm the CEO at Carolina Meadows. We're located in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We're about halfway between the coast of North Carolina and the mountains of North Carolina. I've been at Carolina Meadows since 1998, and I began my career with a local Quaker community back in 1992, so I've been around a while. We serve about 733 residents here at Carolina Meadows. We're located near the University of North Carolina. We're sort of in the hotbed of the Research Triangle Park area in North Carolina. So we do run an early advantage program and a home care program. And I would say that our home care program needs some work because we're still in that investing phase, as I call it, or Nancy calls it. So, but I'm happy to be able to impart what we've learned along the way.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you again to all three of you for joining us today. Now we want to go through the organizations again. Now you've met our speakers and know a little bit about them, and let them tell you a little bit more about the organization. So you have that frame of reference for our conversation today. So Ben, if you could lead us off.
Sure. We have the advantage of being at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay where it joins the Atlantic Ocean. We're a type A life plan community historically. Just celebrated our 39th anniversary. 700 total residents, A- Fitch, type A life plan, faith-based, life care, faith-based community largely. We do have fee-for-service options and refundable options and all the rest. And but time and time again, when everybody's presented with the choices, they seem to stick with our original product, which is life care contracts. We're literally beachfront. That's a God-given blessing. Newly renovated all of our Hoist Center nursing is state of the art, and all of our common spaces and dining venues. We spent money in the low interest environment like a lot of you did, modernizing and trying to get out ahead to stay preeminent in case anything else gets built from the ground up around us. The location and the investment, I think, credibly lets us market as resort style senior living, and we have seen our average age of entry drop 5 years in the last 10. That's always been a big goal of mine. I'm worried about if we become all looking like assisted living, if people will just rent assisted living and not pay entry fees. So we've worked really hard to make our independent living option aspirational instead of something you only consider when you have to come. We're fortunate in a good healthcare team, 5 stars in nursing. We were blessed with 0 COVID infections in nursing and a really good record across all levels of care there, and got a lot of press around that. We're also, one of my passions, charitable give back, is engagement technology. So we have our own tablet, the Birdsong software, and we created our own TV station during the pandemic and pumped our single out to 15 other communities to help entertain people. And so we got, a lot of good press, and it enabled us to stay just as full and independent living at the start of the pandemic as at the end of the pandemic. And we really had an opportunity to flex our muscle in some creative ways on the power of living in community versus being isolated. And that's just one of my passions and why I'm really in the whole industry. So that's the core business. We began an at-home program. We inherited an at-home program, more about that later, a private pay home care. We added certified home health and hospice agencies. And then we added a shared services organization to make that manageable and doable for ourselves and others. And then we added an early advantage program, and we'll tell you more about that later, but currently 57 members, about 120 over the history of the 3-year program. And we've collected $6.4 million in entry fees through the program, and total over the life of the program, about $237,000 in monthly fees. It's about 60 grand a year, but that's the life of the program. And we recently added a life care contract for early advantage, and about 31% of the contracts are life care and 69% are fee for service. So that's Westminster Canterbury in a nutshell.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Nancy, if you could tell
Yes,
us a little bit more about senior options.
I sure can, Rob, and thank you for inviting us to be a part of this panel. I'm learning things as I know the rest of you are. So I'll tell you a little bit about Senior Options. Senior Options, as I said in my introduction, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Westminster Canterbury on Chesapeake Bay. And our mission is to expand and improve services to older adults by building the capacities of not-for-profit organizations who serve them. And so we serve exclusively leading age members, members serving members. And we are, as Ben said, a shared services organization, meaning we bundle together services that are challenging for leading age members to operate because of their sophistication and specialization in highly regulated home health and hospice into a long-term advisory contract. We do both startup and we do long-term operational services. And so the graph on the right shows you that we provide the electronic health record, the financial model, budgeting, billing. We have a quality and compliance component to our work because we want all the members of the network to focus on quality and compliance. Clinical resources for the members, sales and marketing support so that we grow our businesses, and we'll talk about volume in a minute. And then operational resources, basic things like policies and procedures and job descriptions and so on. And so our idea is that you rent instead of buy all these services, and that no single organization has to have them all. We put them together in a bundle and provide them to our members. And so to get started with us, we also offer some steps so that as people are evaluating whether or not this is a business to either continue or to start up, we start with a market feasibility to project demand for the services in that market. We do a 5-year pro forma cash flow projection as well as a capital budget, again, so people know what investment their organization will need to make. And then we do the startup services. So we get the organizations credentialed through accreditation, Medicare certified, set up, and so on. And then, as I mentioned at the previous slide, operational support. And then I just included a slide of members of our network here. So we are currently in 8 states with 15 members, and we are able to be anywhere in this country. The only limitations are the certificate of need states, in which makes it a little more difficult and challenging to start.
Great. Thank you, Nancy.
You're welcome.
Kevin, could you share a little bit more about Carolina Meadows?
Absolutely, Rob. Thank you. So Carolina Meadows has been around since 1985, and I will tell you that it was the brainchild of a gentleman from Presbyterian Homes of Ohio back in the early 80s. So he really wanted something to be noticeably different than the retirement communities that he had actually participated in during his career. So we have sort of a unique model in that we have a program called the Equity Advantage Program. If you think of it in terms of this, we're really a rental CCRC with an entry fee when it comes to the bare bones, but it's been our bread and butter for all these years, and that's one of the reasons we've been so successful. We do enjoy currently a Fitch rating of A-, which was recently just reaffirmed. We have 633 units across campus, 448 IL, 80 assisted living, 15 memory care, and 90 skilled beds. We're currently in process of building another 40 homes for our independent living residents. And I will say they are all sold. They were literally sold in the first 2 weeks they went on the market. Our marketing team did a fabulous job. We have a rather long waiting list, so we were able to peel some of the residents off the waiting list, which has also been very successful for our Early Advantage program, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. We're currently serving 733 residents on campus, another 133 residents off campus. So I mentioned that we're close to the University of North Carolina, the School of Medicine there as well. So we have a lot of retired faculty from UNC. We even have some folks from Duke University, because we're about 10 miles from Duke University as well. So we have a very, very intelligent cohort of residents. They're always involved, very active. In fact, we have 4 residents that serve on our board. They're full voting residents. In other words, they are just like any other board member that comes to be on the board for Carolina Meadows. So our Early Advantage program retains all the membership rights as if you were living on campus. And I think our folks really like being part of that program. So we'll talk a little bit more about the Early Advantage program in just a second. So it was begun in 2017. We currently have 114 members. We were as high as 116 at the end of 2020. Obviously, COVID has had some issues and wreaked havoc on some of our numbers, as it has in most of our campuses around the country. But I think for the most part, we've been very successful still. I mean, I will say too that we still had folks moving into independent living all through 2020. It did slow down, but folks were still moving into independent living. I will say too, on the Early Advantage program, 4 members have moved into the higher care levels off our list, 18 to move into independent living. And we'll talk about the entry fees, I'm sure, a little bit later, but it is an assurance product, as I like to call it. It's not an insurance, but assurance. Simply means if a person's health changes later, they can still move into the higher care levels or into independent living. Thank you, Rob. Oh, I'll talk about home care program too. That was begun in 2018, and I'll use a term that Nancy King has already used. We are in the investing phase still. We started relatively slow, and I think one of the things you're going to hear Nancy talk about is not thinking small, but thinking large, and I totally agree with her. So I'm going to put a plug in for her conversation a little bit early. We've served primarily on our campus, 220 folks thus far. We compete with another 5 to 6 home care agencies that are already providing home care on campus. We're trying to elbow our way into this market, particularly with our folks that are living on campus, because it seems to me that revenue that goes off-site probably should stay on-site, and it could actually help our community even more. Right. We basically broke even in 2019. We did lose money in 2020, primarily because of COVID. We lost some business because we closed our campus. And we have the overhead burden of shared management services that gets tacked on to the home care piece. It is a separate 501c3 entity, but it's run out of our corporate office here at Carolina Meadows. We believe that we're going to be positioned to rebound in 2021. We're increasing our staffing, and we just opened up our campus effectively on this past Monday. So we're trying to get back to normal as much as possible. So I'll leave it at that, Rob. Thank you.
Great, thank you again to all 3. So I want to start, as we delve into more of these services, let's focus on home and community-based services first. And Nancy, I'm going to ask you to lead off on this part, because I think you have some really interesting things to share. From my perspective, and one of the reasons we wanted to explore this in the webinar today was, for years, we've been asked by clients, by CEOs, by boards, should we be getting into home and community-based services? And there's lots of conversation about it, but over and over and over, we see organizations, they see the market, they see the competition that's out there. It's not like they're ever going to be the first. And even markets have oftentimes hundreds of providers of various sorts of various home-based services. And the feeling I get often is, there's just not enough of a margin here to, for us to put the time and the effort into developing this type of service to provide to the market. So lots of concerns about margin. But when I met you a couple of years ago and started talking, it really became clear that this is not at all your experience, that there is a significant margin to be made out there. So if you could cast a broader light on all this for our participants today, what is that margin potential? what are the key success factors that communities need to be thinking about and doing to achieve that potential? And what are some of the common mistakes you see them making along the way?
Yes, and Rob, I get the same question as you do everywhere I go. What can we expect as a margin? And I will say that if you watch the large companies, the for-profits, the degree of action in the market, purchasing hospice and home health, right there, you know, they wouldn't be doing it if there weren't a margin factor in there. So in senior options, if you combined our 15 members and they're independent and we don't roll up to one company, but if you combined them, our combined margin would be 8%. If you exclude our startups who aren't really, you know, we're in the investing stage, Kevin. And COVID has had a negative impact on our operations. I do want to say that clearly, not only in people being afraid to use us or our referral sources being closed, but also in staff being afraid to join us, staff being afraid to come to work or have patients or just worried about the risk involved to them. But apart from the COVID, our own home health agency has about a 10 to 12% margin every year. And it's home health. Our model is home health, private duty home care, and hospice. So those three together, and that's part of our model. So we have about a 10 to 12% margin every year. So how do we do that? Number one success factor by far, as the CEO and the executive team supporting the integration of home health and hospice on campus. Our philosophy is you start with a base at your own campus of volume of residents. You have to be good enough to be accepted and admired by your own residents. And if you're not, you can't go out in the community. So we like to start on campus. And that involves the CEO, the healthcare administrator, the AL administrator, the independent living, the clinic. All of those folks have to come together and make room for and understand the value of where hospice and home health come into play, right? If you say, if that we build it, they will come, they will not come because it has to be a referral. And so it's really up to your internal team to look at all the opportunities to get residents their Medicare benefits for home health and hospice. And of course, private duty is a service that clients select themselves. So it is easier to start that, although Kevin, like you said, there's a lot of competitors that just love our campuses. So the first secret ingredient is the internal support. The second one is volume. This is a scale business. And so if you look at margins for agencies of various sizes, you can see as the agency size gets bigger, the margin gets bigger. So it is one where we look at how big can this agency get and what's a good margin for their size. And so we definitely want, I also, on an operational basis, I think it's just brutal to be small. It puts the scheduler or the manager on call all the time. It puts the nurses on call. You don't have a break for vacations. So we really like to see a more substantial agency where you have redundancies and you have a way to cover for people who aren't there, et cetera. Scope, we believe home health and hospice and home care that's our model. Obviously, there are other services that our whole team has worked with that also can join in. And then the last thing is try not to fit the round peg in the square hole. So we want to success factor is using system standards that are comparable to the home care and hospice market, not comparable to the retirement community market. So there is a market rate, for example, for home health nurses. It may or may not be the same as your healthcare nurses or your AL nurses. So you want things to be consistent with the market that you're competing within, which is home health, hospice, and private duty. So those are the success factors. I can continue with lessons learned, Rob, unless you have another
No,
comment in
let's
there.
please keep right on going. That'd be great.
All right, I sure will. So we have an opportunity to really understand lessons learned first by our own bumps and bruises, broken arms and so on, but also because half of the partners we bring to Senior Options are already operational. And so they're needing that specialized systems and structures. So we've got a firsthand glimpse of common mistakes, and we're happy to share them. We really are. So this is the first mistake, and Kevin, excuse me, tipped it off at the beginning. You need scale. You just can't think small. A lot of folks that we work with just want to do something for their residents. They don't want to go outside their little community. We don't want to go outside the county. We don't need to market it. You do need to market it. You might be able to get away with a small private duty agency if you have no expectation for margin. But home health and hospice, you really need some scale, and you do have to drive. It's a home-based services, meaning you get in your car and go provide care to their homes. So all those things are necessary ingredients, excuse me. The other thing I don't like about being small is that it breeds bad habits. So when you're small, people get used to doing things in a less systematic, a more ad hoc way. And so I advocate for a reasonable and planned growth so that the systems and structures are guiding, as opposed to, you know, what's between people's ears and their memories and their own way of doing things. And you also want to be able to say yes to your referral sources. And if you say no too much, they won't refer to you. So having a larger organization does help with that. And I realize you don't start large, but I think it's important from the beginning to have your eyes on the prize of being at least a mid-sized agency, 3 million, 5 million, 8 million or more. Another lesson learned is this chicken and egg of when do you hire the staff or do you get the volume? Which comes first? And my chicken and egg are both saying it's me, right? Well, what comes first is staff, period. What comes first is staff. And so there are agencies that, well, when we grow, we'll hire a marketing person. That's just not how it works. Or once we grow, we'll hire some more aides or a second nurse. So you do want to grow in tandem with volume. That's true, but you do need to have enough folks to start at the beginning so that you're right there and you can serve people when the call comes. You're going to want to blend a full-time and PRN staff. A lot of the folks we work with don't know what PRN staff means. That means as needed, as in taking a drug PRN. And one thing you don't want to do again is to turn down referrals. So we advocate planned growth targets and planned recruitment targets so we can get this chicken and egg narrative resolved. And another way, another lesson learned is underestimating the communication needs on campus. I mentioned how important the executive team and the CEO is to a successful implementation. But beyond the executive team, it's really critical to go through the layers of the organization and really talk about how the continuum is going to change when you add your own home health, your own private duty, and your own hospice. Staff roles change, practice changes. And people have been doing things in our world for a long time, and they think they're doing them great, and they are. So a common resistance is we already do end of life well. Why do we need to bring in hospice? Or we already have outpatient therapy. Why do we need to use home health? These questions are common, and I can tell you to a partner have come up. So we just want to kind of foresee those questions and foresee kind of our response and kind of plan it. And then remember, we never stop having this conversation. Of course, staff turnover, new DON, new AL manager, you got to be on top of it. So the next thing we want to be very specifically aware of as a common obstacle hurdle mistake is therapy management. And I've often said, as kindly as I can to CEOs and administrators, you don't want to lose your agency because of a therapy company. And if you use your campus therapy company, if they don't have that home health expertise, they're really going to be challenging to work with. And we've had many therapy companies who are excellent, but they want to drive things to outpatient. And there's nothing wrong with outpatient care, except when you have home health, one of the biggest services you provide is helping people get safe at home. And so there is that utilization management that you have to take a look at. Also in continuum management, we say A before B. So if the resident or the client is eligible for Medicare Part A, which is home health, that's what they do first. If they're not eligible, they go to Part B. Once they discharge from home health, they go to Part B. So this is a tricky area on campus, and I just hold that up for your audience, Rob, because this is a common tripping point. And then the last thing I will mention is that systems and structures really have to align with your home health, hospice, home care, your certified services. If it's PACE, that means you have to have people who can bill in that area. You have to have regulatory expertise in that area. There's a real attempt to bring the home health and hospice folks into the campus. We're all one, and they go to all the meetings. You just got to be careful you don't overschedule these folks because they have a different business to run, so you have to be judicious. We don't want to compare a brand new organization to one that's 30 years old or 40 years old. So it's tempting, but so these systems and structures really do have to align with your new business.
Great, thank you. So I think that was a really strong overview of the potential that's available to communities and organizations, whether they currently have a home care program that's small and maybe struggling around that break-even mark, or whether they're thinking of getting into this side of things to begin with at all. I think it's a lot of really good tips and strategies and insights, and thank you for sharing that. I'd like to shift over to you, Ben. Now that Nancy's kind of laid that groundwork for us with more detail on the overall side of things, can you give us a little bit more insight on Westminster Canterbury at Home and what led you to focus on this, just a general overview, and the kind of benefit it's had for the community as a whole?
Well, I'd love to pretend to be a visionary, but it was just problem solving. I got here and we were barely treading water at the Great Recession. And one area where we were really good at losing money was in home care. We had our own home care agency and we were losing $400,000 a year. Now that's a lot of money that can be reinvested in capital and expansion and all that stuff. But anyway, we were losing $400,000 a year. So I didn't have to do much to look like a genius with that. And, I saw it and said, look, we got to get certified in home health. They said, oh gosh, we'll get surveys. Surveys are terrible. I said, well, we're going to have to find people who can do that. We're going to either have to shut this down and you're going to lose this service, or we're going to have to go beyond our gates, number one, right away. And we're going to have to get more payer sources, home health and hospice. It was a volume question. And so we went doing all that on our own. Now, I came from a large corporate environment, Erickson Living, and I was used to the VP of home and community-based services in Baltimore. And, I thought, okay, well, we can just do this on our own. I don't have a Baltimore anymore. And we tried and we had some success. We got to $400,000 in profits instead of losses. But it was hard, and I got a much better appreciation for lack of systems that you're tempted to with size, people having tribal knowledge between their ears and then leaving. And I looked at the 4 ways you could lose money or get yourself into trouble with this. And I said, the chances of finding that in one administrator level person for this distinct business line, who's good at all four of these things. Remote scheduling, so that you're not going from one end of town to the other, and that scheduling program. Managing quality remotely instead of just looking down the hallway at your nurses' aides and your nurses. Billing, you can go to jail for that. You do that wrong, and it's a different system than skilled nursing. And I don't look good in stripes, horizontal or vertical. So, and then marketing is a whole different thing. It's not just destination event marketing. You've got to be out there making rain and getting the referrals. So the only way to get to volume and sustain it, I said, okay, I cried uncle, pardon the pun, and said, I got to bring in more executive talent in this area, or it's going to cause me to go gray in 1 year here. And we need people who know what they're doing. And I can't afford them at this size business, but I'm going to hire them anyway and hope that we can divide out these services and share them, because I can't be the only senior living organization of my size for which this is really hard and awkward to pull off. And so we brought Nancy and others in, and we were successful helping one of our colleagues in Virginia go from, losing money for 2 years after they bought an existing agency, and the board said, fix it or shut it down. And we got them to positive cash flow and positive margin in 6 months. And then I said, good, we are going to have ways to get people to contribute to Nancy's services and get this scale. And then we started picking up partners, and we grew very quickly to, I think, 17 agencies. 3, 4, 5 years. But it is something you either need to go big or go home. And I was stuck. I was halfway there and it was giving me heart palpitations and causing me lots of trouble. And I just said, either I get out or we decide to focus on this and do this well and help others do it well. And so, today, even in a bad year, COVID year, we're generating a $1.2 million positive free cash flow back to the mothership from our local agencies. So, if you do it right and you hire the right talent, there's ways to touch more souls and serve more souls, and have your senior living organization be the aging services expert in your market and the hub for lots of other senior services, which contributes to your reputation, ways to serve more people, get your reputation better and better. And there's a lot of money to be made in this, a lot of extra margin, which our residents appreciate. At first, they said, just keep the soup warm here. Don't go off campus. And I said, well, if I don't go off campus, I'm not going to be able to do it at all. I'm going to have to take it back. And as they've become accustomed to seeing our annual budget presentation and fee increase and see the contribution our local agencies are making to keeping their fees down, they're believers. So anyway, that's our story.
Great. Thank you very much. Kevin, can you share a little bit about your program? I know you're at a different stage, as you shared earlier, than Ben and Nancy are with theirs. What were some of your reasons for launching the program, and how do the services that you're offering compare to what Ben is doing?
Thanks, Rob. Happy to comment on our home care program. As I mentioned earlier, we were looking at the number of providers providing business on our campus already to our residents. And we just felt that there's something wrong with that picture, and why couldn't we do some of that as well? So part of it was to get into the market to displace some of the providers that are already working on campus. We can't prohibit folks from selecting the home care provider of their choice, but we'd like to be the provider of their choice. As I mentioned earlier, we are in that startup and investing stage since we're relatively new to the market. I feel like we have one good year behind us with experience, then we had COVID, and now we're working on 2021. So there's an opportunity for us to go up at this point. I think there are some similarities with Ben's program, but I think we're still really, really early in the process. And I will tell you, when we first started talking about this presentation, I learned a lot from Nancy and Ben. So I hope our viewers today will take note of their expertise and the bumps in the roads that they have mastered. So we're also in that process. And I would be one of those clients, if I did business with Nancy, that she would say, here's what you did wrong, here's what you can do better. So I think we will learn from this experience. But and one of the things that we're working on now on a bigger level is our strategic plan for our parent corporation, which we have a parent corporation in place, and home care is a part of that corporation. It does provide services to the CCRC only. So in some ways, we started out thinking small just to get it right on our current campus, but we can't stay on our current campus long term. We have a license for 9 counties surrounding the county that we're in. And if at some point we don't take it off campus, then quite frankly, I think we need to shut it down because it's just not going to be big enough to matter. It's more of a headache right now, but again, it's in that startup phase and investing phase. I'm willing to go further with it until we grow it a little bit more. As Nancy mentioned earlier, how do you staff? Do you staff early or do you staff later? You can't expect the business to come if you can't provide the business to start with. So staffing has been a real hurdle for us early on. But I like the idea of staffing up, which is what we're trying to do now in 2021, because we have turned down business because folks who need longer term stays or longer stays during the day, we've not been able to provide that because we simply didn't have the staff. But I'm hoping that we can move forward, and hope is not a strategy. It's a position. So let me not use hope. Let's use intent, because we want to have the right staff to meet the needs as they come along. Given the size of our campus and the fact that we have the Early Advantage program off campus now with so many residents on that program, it would be beneficial for us to consider taking it off campus as much as possible within our defined radius for the folks that are in our Early Advantage program. But we got to get it right on campus first before we take it off campus. And I think this year we're going to get it right and start seeing the numbers grow. I was optimistic that we did as well as we did in 2019. So I think that's a sign of things to come. Again, COVID, I throw this past year out the window, and essentially we're starting over in 2021. So what else can I say?
No, that's great. So as we wrap up the home and community-based services section, I'd just like to ask each of you real briefly, 30 seconds or so, if you could pass on some words of wisdom to another CEO, COO, CFO out there who is either looking at growing a program or starting a program, what words of wisdom would you share with them? And Kevin, if you could lead us off.
Sure, and this is something we've already alluded to. The primary risk is not thinking too large, but thinking too small. If we look at the traditional CCRC model, we all have waiting lists. We all have folks who've expressed interest in coming to our campuses. The CCRC is one line of business, as Nancy said earlier. Home and community-based services is a totally different line of business. While they may intersect on our campus, they're two different lines of business, and we have to treat them as two different lines of businesses. So, but I would challenge the group that if you're looking at your wait list, folks, lots of times we look at wait lists to say that they're not really our residents, but they are our residents by virtue of the fact that they've expressed interest in us. So we take them from the minute they make the first phone call. We really should consider those folks as in our revenue line at that point. We may not be making money off of them when they first make the call. Everybody gets a deposit to get on a waiting list. That's not really money, but that relationship begins with that first call. And then we have an opportunity to build them up from the time they get on the waiting list to the time they move in or the time they get on the Early Advantage program. So, and I would also challenge the group to think about not just on your campus, how else could we do additional revenue? Bricks and mortar is expensive. If you think about building another community or some other satellite campus, I'm not saying that those satellite campuses aren't a good move. Many folks have branched off into that, and that's something that I think we're going to consider in the future. But how could you grow revenue with the least amount of risk? And we think the Early Advantage program, at least from our perspective, has been a great way to do that. To tag on again to something Nancy's talked about, adding the home care and hospice and home health, we need to add or consider the hospice and home health as we look forward to the future. We're in the process right now of deciding, do we renovate, rebuild a 90-bed SNF unit on our campus? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to consider adding the same number of nursing beds on our campus that we currently have if you look at the decline in census over the years in skilled nursing. So something's going on. We need to pay attention to what's going on in the marketplace and on our campus. Our census has been relatively low for the last 8 to 10 years in our SNP program. We still are full basically with residents living here. Tells me a couple of things. One, they're living longer and they're living much healthier. And two, most folks don't want to go to skilled nursing. So if you can solve that skilled nursing problem with home health, home care, or hospice, makes a whole lot of sense. So again, those are less dollar intensive lines of business than bricks and mortar. That comes with a lot of debt. I don't know if you've done any construction lately in your campuses. Construction costs are astronomical. It takes a long time to get those projects financed and get them finished. Not that it's not a challenge to get home health and home care and hospice up and running, but I think it's far less of a challenge in terms of the long-term expense burden that you put on a campus. So that's what I would suggest is our words of wisdom from Carolina Meadows.
Great, thank you. Ben, is there a brief take on something you would share with another CEO or C-suite person?
Just don't make the mistake of thinking it's easy to do, whether it's big or whether it's small. It's a different line of business. You need the expertise that you can call on. Don't make the mistake of thinking, I mean, I interviewed someone who said he had opened something before and he knew how to do it. And he was just going to be calling consultants, I found out later. And, you know, so I would just say the experts are rare and hard to find, and sharing them is a good model.
Great, thank you. And Nancy, this is your core competency. If there was one thing that you could briefly share with others out there, well, what would that be?
You know, for the C-suite, for the CEO, the leadership, is to get it in your head, that vision. Like, how is it going to look in 5 years? What's going to be different? And keep that vision in front of you, because that is what's going to guide you through those startup bumps and challenges. But really understand, hey, this is going to be a great thing for your organization, for your community, for the seniors you serve, for your early advantage list. And let's keep that in mind of how your organization looks in 5 years because of this.
Great, thank you. So before we shift to the next section, just want a general comment for our audience members today. We normally try and structure these so we try and wrap up the actual presentation by about 1 o'clock, and then we leave until 1:30 for Q&A and discussion. Just looking at the time so far on this one, I think we're probably going to be running more like about 1:05 or 1:10 by the time we're done with the core part of the presentation. It's a little more, I think it's just been great insights that, you know, Ben, you, Nancy, and Kevin have shared. But it looks like we're probably going to be running more to about 1:10. If some of you need to leave before then at 1 o'clock, just a reminder that a link to the full recording of this will be sent out to everyone. So coming back then, the focus now, we're going to switch over to the Early Advantage Program, which may be something that many of you out there are really not familiar with what that is and what it means. And Kevin in Carolina Meadows have been really successful with this program. So I'm going to ask Kevin to lead off and give us a little bit more detail on what does the Early Advantage Program really look like? How does it work? What do residents get? What's that service package? Why did they do this? And how has it helped Carolina Meadows? So Kevin, over to you.
Sure, Rob, thank you. First of all, our board took a long view of home and community-based services a number of years ago. I literally sent board members all over the country to leading edge meetings to attend home and community-based service courses. When we brought it back to our board and really started talking about it and looking at what we could and could not do with our local Department of Insurance, we decided that the CCRC Without Walls concept, or home and community-based services, really, we had some homework to do. In North Carolina, we were limited by the statutory language, which did not allow a continuing care at home or continuing care at home, because quite frankly, the regulators didn't know what to do with it. Myself, along with 3 other local CCRCs, CCRC CEOs, we worked together to formulate some language. Unfortunately, we had someone sponsor that language with our General Assembly. We got the rules changed slightly for the Department of Insurance. Basically, what they put in the language was continuing care without lodging, which simply meant you could have a contract and stay at home, but you stayed at your home and you didn't live on campus. Along with that, the Department of Insurance also said it must be part of your continuing care retirement community. And by the way, North Carolina does not like the term life plan community, so it's still CCRC in the language. So we refer to it as CCRC, but it's still a life plan community. But they required that it had to be part of the CCRC. You had to break out your expenses and your revenues separately. You had to have a separate actuary study, and you had to have the actuary sign off on your program, which we did. We also looked at our waiting lists, and we realized that our waiting list was creeping up. At one point, we had about 850 people on our waiting list. And we do something a little bit unique. We break our waiting list up into a waiting list and a ready list. A ready list are folks who are really ready to move in. They've sold their homes. They might be living across the street in the apartment complexes, just waiting for their number to be called to come over. So we realized that there's some pent-up demand. And then when we looked at the constraints for the type of contract that we have, which is a fee-for-service contract, as opposed to a life care contract, we thought long and hard, what should we do? So we decided to create the Early Advantage program. And I will say too, there's another local CCRC, and I'll put a plug in for Carol Woods here in Chapel Hill. They were the early adopters of this program. They went through the Department of Insurance first. We learned from them, and they've been very successful as well. So we just tacked on to what they had already done. We tweaked ours to make it unique to Carolina Meadows. But I would say both of our communities, and we're literally 5 miles apart, we've been very successful with our Early Advantage. I think they call theirs the Early Acceptance Program, but ours is Early Advantage. And we use the term Advantage because it matches up with our Equity Advantage contract. That's a tagline we've used for a number of years on the contract type that we have. So in terms of our Early Advantage program, I know folks are probably saying, well, what do they get for this? How does it work? Who's involved? So as I mentioned earlier, we have currently 113 folks on the Early Advantage program. We have a waiting list currently of 132 people waiting to get on the Early Advantage program. We've had folks who came directly to us that were not on our waiting list that wanted to get on the Early Advantage program. One of the things that we do that drives our marketing team absolutely crazy is everybody gets signed a priority number. That priority number means something to the residents. It means something to the folks living here. It means something to the folks who are yet to live here. So we work those priority numbers to move people in. They do not lose that number when they go to Early Advantage. They keep that number in perpetuity. So basically, under the Early Advantage program, folks have complete access to the community. They have complete access to all the amenities. They can come and dine at any time. They have the resident meal price as part of being a resident. The Department of Insurance in North Carolina requires that they must be a full-fledged resident, even if they don't live on your campus. So they do get an Early Advantage contract, but when they move to campus, we give them a contract, which is a contract subsequent to being in the Early Advantage program. So we have a fairly robust dining program. And I will say during COVID, many of our Early Advantage folks came to Carolina Meadows to pick up their meals. We prepared their meals and had them waiting for them on the sidewalk. So it was really curb service. And they provided the meals that they wanted. We prepared them and they would come and pick them up. They also made use of all of the amenities. As I mentioned earlier, we have a golf course, pool, tennis courts, bocce court, walking trails, fitness area. One of the things that we're really proud of is we have a medical practice on campus. It's staffed by our own geriatrician. We have 2 nurse practitioners, and RNs that work in that practice. So many of our early advantage folks actually come to see our doctor and clinical staff on campus. We are Part B clinic, so they can file Medicare Part B as well. So in terms of other amenities or other things that can get under the Early Advantage program, we do provide 2 transportation trips per month for doctor's visits. We do have a set radius of 25 miles. So if somebody needs transportation and they're in the Early Advantage program, they just give us a call and we make sure they get the transportation taken care of. Another thing that we provide in the Early Advantage program is 5 days in the healthcare per year, up to a maximum of 10 days lifetime, as long as you're still under the Early Advantage program. If you were to move into Carolina Meadows, then you lose those days because you're now really on campus. So one of the things we had to really work with on our existing residents is to selling them on why this was important to them to implement such a program, because our residents that live here now like the exclusivity of our campus. Even though we're not a gated campus, I don't consider ourselves exclusive, but when a person buys into something, they want to say this is exclusive. They want to think that they've made a really good choice, and they have made a good choice. But many of our residents were concerned that the campus would be overrun by too many residents that were not paying the full load. But then when we convinced them of the additional revenue that was going to be coming to the campus, they were all good about that. So we generate about $780,000 a year in additional revenue off this program. That's not to mention the entry fees that we've collected thus far of about $1.5 million. We do reserve those dollars, although they do count in our days cash on hand ratios. The entry fee does amortize over 24 months. So in other words, if you were to stay on the program until passing, then you would get nothing back. But if you were to move into Carolina Meadows, and we've had 18 folks move into independent living thus far, that entry fee does count toward the entry fee of the unit when you move in. So they don't lose it if they move on campus. And we've had quite a few folks come and go from our health or higher care levels, our skilled nursing, memory care. They come, they get well, or they get better, and they go back home. So they've made use of those 5 days, and in some cases the 10 days. But as I mentioned earlier, we do have to list it out separately in our annual disclosure statement, which is required by the state of North Carolina. One of the things that we did not realize going into this early on, what we were made aware of by the Department of Insurance, when we implemented the Early Advantage program, we had to have at least 3 signed contracts with home care agencies for the Department of Insurance to approve this, which we did. We had, as I mentioned, we had providers, we have preferred providers, so it was easy to get those contracts. But we also wanted to be a preferred provider under home care. So I think it's beneficial to us to have our own home care program as an incident to the Early Advantage program as well. So that's the reason that we've been pretty successful thus far under Early Advantage. But I just got a blank on my screen. I can't see anything. Hang on one second here.
That's right. All right, I thought it was here. Just to confirm again, because I know you shared this up front, the entrance fee is $13,500 per person. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And the monthly fee is $575 per person. Is that correct?
$575 per person, yes.
So if a couple moves in, it's $27,000 and whatever that is of $1,150 a month.
Yeah.
Not moves in, joins the program. All right. So question for you, Kevin. I mean, you've noted you're in the heart of a very competitive market. You know, I believe I remember for some work we did with you several years ago that many prospects are on multiple community wait lists. Yet you've had, as many as 116 members at one point, which that seems to me to be a pretty amazing commitment level that people are willing to pay this every month and say, of all these competitive communities, and I may be on several wait lists, I'm going to commit to Carolina Meadows. Do you think this Early Advantage offering it has given you more of a competitive advantage in the market?
I think certainly there is a competitive advantage to having the Early Advantage program, but I would also offer that during the economic downturn in 2008, 2009, our local area did quite well in terms of occupancy across all of the local communities. So there's a huge draw with the university system with Duke, UNC, and NC State, and the medical facilities at Duke University and UNC. And the fact that we're in the middle of the RTP, or Research Triangle Park area, people come from miles around and other countries, quite frankly, to live in this area. So I think the Early Advantage gives a leg up in the sense that people can say, I like my home, I want to stay at home, but I want the assurance that if something happens to me, I can go to a higher care level. And that has happened on many occasions. So I think there is a competitive advantage. And again, I'll bring up Carol Woods. I think Carol Woods has experienced something very similar to us. We have very similar residents. We all share residents from the university systems. But I think people choose one over the other based on the underlying CCRC contract. Ours is a fee for service. Carol Woods is a life care type B contract. Great contract, lots of success. I don't know that I could point to one thing necessarily, but given the fact that we have highly engaged residents and they talk, it's benefiting us because we've had a long, good reputation for a long time, and that gets shared far and wide. So, so in terms of prospects on community wait lists, we all know that if you're in a market similar to ours, and I can only imagine what it might be like up in Pennsylvania or Florida, people have got to be on a mini waiting list. We felt like, and I'm sure Carol Woods felt the same way, that if we had some way to, for want of a better term, hook our residents further into our campus, this was a way to do it. What we heard from many of our focus groups was people don't want to move to a CCRC at this point when they're 75 or 80 years old, but they want to know they can come when they need to. So we know many of our folks that are on our Early Advantage program may never move to Carolina Meadows. And they made the conscious choice to pay what I call the assurance fee for that security and being able to come to a higher care level. So I mentioned earlier about our entry fees. We do restrict them in terms of a board restriction, but those monies get moved over when a person moves into independent living, and then it gets gobbled up in the annual cash flow. We do count it towards our days cash on hand, but other than that restriction, we don't have any further restrictions on the entry fees. So,
all right, great, thank you, Ben. So as you're about to share, your program looks very different in a number of ways. It has some similarities to Kevin's and some differences. If you could just give us a brief overview of the program, why you started doing this and what some of the similarities or differences are. We appreciate that.
Well, the reason we started doing it, quite simply, is to have other people willing to pay to operate this community, and to make some added revenue stream from outsiders, give them reasons to come and dine with us, taste with us. So we sold the assurance. I love Kevin's word, and here I'm going to return the compliment. He's far ahead of us on Early Advantage. We sold the assurance of future healthcare, use the country club during the day, sleep in your own house at night, and take care of business for your future if your health deteriorates. So that's where we were. We went more heavily on entry fee, and we tried higher monthly fees and weren't getting market acceptance. We've sold about 120 contracts. There are about 57 active today, 3 deaths, but most have moved into the community over time and credited that entrance fee. We're only getting about 60 grand in monthly fees a year. It's about 270 in the life of the program over 3 years. Kevin's doing much better with that, but we don't bundle any services for that entry fee. That entry fee is just daytime access to the campus and assurance of future healthcare. And so anyway, we certainly could go to work and look at leaders like Kevin and say, gosh, do we want to bundle some home health hours in? And is there more opportunity for margin if you make the monthly fee more attractive? I know he's got a golf course, so I can't compete with that, for people to come in and use the country club there. But anyway, a different approach there. The only complexity we added in is we did offer a life care option. And again, no bundled services with it. It's just that when you're ready to come, you don't have to pass another medical test. And if you're going to a higher level of care, you can pay the, 2-bedroom independent living fee as opposed to 14 grand in the nursing center. And that's attractive to some people. And, you have an actuarial analysis and, off of the early advantage contracts, we would make, about a 26% surplus margin over the life of the contract. So it was a way to make additional margins by not laying one more brick or mortar and only paying lawyers to write a contract. And of course, once you've made a $40,000 commitment per person, 80,000 per couple to Westminster, only half of which is refundable if you move out of the market. They're pretty well locked into us for future move-ins. So anyway.
Great, thanks. And just some numbers out of both what you and Kevin shared, have just really jumped out at me. And I just want to go back and revisit them. And it shows there's no one specific way to put together this. You have a lot of flexibility on how to structure an early advantage program. But Kevin's is a low entry fee, and relative to yours is a high monthly fee. His is $13,500 to get in, yours is more like $50,000 per person. But you have a very low monthly fee. You're generating $60,000 a year from the program. Kevin's generating more than $750,000, each year. So very different things. But this number just stood out to me. You've collected $6.4 million in entrance fees. That's just an amazing number over not really a very long period of time. And are there any restrictions on how you can use that? Because I suspect that's a very appealing number to a lot of people who are watching this.
No, on your P&L, you amortize it the way Kevin's done it, but it counts in our days cash on hand. It counts in bond covenants. It's unrestricted cash. There's very few scenarios where you'd be refunding that entry fee. So no, it helps improve our cash position. There's no doubt.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, in the interest of time, I want to get to our last section. I'm going to bypass these words of wisdom. My apologies to you for that, but I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A. So what I would like to do is give you all, as we wrap up here, an opportunity to share, as you look at the vision for your communities for the future, or just for senior living in general. We've talked about early advantage. We've talked about home and community-based services. What additional opportunities may you see out there for us to, our communities to be able to expand services? And Kevin, if you could lead us off again there.
Sure, I'm happy to. I'll use a term that Ben has used earlier called the mothership. We refer to our campus as a mothership too when we talk about early advantage. But we see early advantage not just something for folks that are tied to this particular campus. We do see a possibility, and a pretty good possibility, of working with some of the other local for-profit age-restricted communities where folks are moving in that might be 60, 70, 80 years old. They're not young, they're still, or not old, they're still young in their minds. But at some point, they're going to need some assistance or something in terms of long-term care. So we believe there's an opportunity to reach out to some of these local communities. If I count around our local area here, there's at least 5 of these for-profit groups that have absolutely no home care, no health care, no nothing in terms of support services for folks. This is a golden opportunity for us. And it might be for those of you in our audience in your local market areas. So we also think adding home health and hospice. In fact, in our planning meetings we've had recently, in discussions with many of our board members and some of our resident leadership, there's strong interest in home health and hospice here at Carolina Meadows. And again, if we have that opportunity to create the relationships with the freestanding communities, bringing that home health and hospice to those folks as well. That's also going to figure into our thinking about strategic planning for right sizing or maybe changing the size of our existing skilled nursing. There's a possibility we could bring people into that area that are not even connected to our campus at this point. We do have a closed certificate of need. So the only way we can bring people in is if they have a contract. And if they're under the Early Advantage program, they have that contract. So as we mentioned earlier, bricks and mortar are expensive. So looking at ways of bringing additional revenue to our campuses and to your campuses is important, particularly as we look in the future of rising healthcare costs and replacement of existing facilities on campus. All of us have aging facilities. It's expensive to run these freestanding CCRCs or CCRC campuses in general. So if there are other ways to bring revenue in, we all should be considering those. So, but also I would suggest maximize and leverage the brand that you and your communities already have. That brand is worth something. It's meaningful to folks who know you, and your reputation is meaningful. Capitalize on that. Be creative. Think about how you might make this happen. So, and one plug I would say, make sure you work with a competent actuary to run your numbers, because if you don't, you can get in trouble pretty quickly. So they can help with pricing and advising, as well as people like Nancy. They will do a good job in helping you.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. And Nancy, what do you see for communities as opportunities in the future?
I really like the early advantage programs that Ben and Kevin described. I do think there is going to be a pressing need for more private duty home care. It is something that is rare to get. It's hard to find those caregivers, but the market is going to press the prices for not only the service, but the wages for those caregivers up. And I do think that's huge. I love the PACE program. We've had experience with PACE programs, and I do think in your state, it's worth fighting to get a PACE, and even to have a modified PACE for not just low income individuals, but for middle income. And then I think we're only scratching the surface of technology, and we'd probably do a lot more if there was built-in reimbursement. But I think those things are great possibilities.
Great, and thank you. And Ben, wrap us off with some just amazingly visionary thoughts.
Well,
No pressure.
That's pressure. I'm just going to go with the theme that, and the sky is the limit, but I'm going to go with the theme of, be the aging services hub that really ripples out in every direction in new and innovative ways in your community. We, I think for a long time have been tied to bricks and mortars, thinking that was our business, to only provide engagement and healthcare through residential living. I can see the whole Shore Drive corridor next to us. I wouldn't give up any nursing home beds if I were you. Because if you do the early advantage, you have your way to fill them in the future. And I can see, life plan communities, CCRCs being the hub, and you don't have to own the real estate to bring the mission to people who might be within a shuttle bus loop of you in neighboring places and come during the day and enrich your community with more diversity and lifelong learning. I mean, scale is a beautiful thing. Scale gives us so much greater opportunity for excellence and diversity in our service lines. And there are so many needs, as we saw during this pandemic, for engagement and purposeful living, that we can fill that gap for the 95% who make the wrong decision and don't move to a CCRC. So you be the anchor and just spread your ripple out far and wide and creatively. The sky is the limit because the need is vast and growing.
Great, thank you. So again, thank you to all three of our panelists today. It's just been some great insights to share. And I really appreciate your being willing to share your time and thoughts with the field in general. I do want to get to a couple of questions that have come in here. And I think I know pretty much which direction to put each of them. The first one, Nancy, I think is going to come your way. And it says, specific to home health, do you have any comments on negative pressure from managed care reimbursement levels? And how can you manage that effectively as you look at home and community-based services?
That's a great question. And the person who submitted it is absolutely right. The managed care rates are appalling. We say they pay slow or they pay no. It's just a very difficult thing to provide the services, but we also know the managed care plans are growing, and we absolutely have to be in that business. We have to be able to serve people who are in a Medicare Advantage plan in order to tell a referral source that we can take the majority of their patients, and in order to serve the people in our communities. So it is a margin eroder. We do some scenario planning to kind of advise people. Obviously, the more regular Medicare you can attract, the better. And sometimes if you take some difficult cases, then you're going to be more likely to get the straight Medicare cases, the less complex payer sources. But it's definitely a margin eroder. And it would be very hard to have full-time staff or a large agency with a lot of full-time staff with a purely managed care population you're serving.
Great, thank you. Kevin, the next couple I think are coming your way. One is the $13,500 entrance fee refundable if the potential resident withdraws? And I believe you said that amortizes over 2 years.
That is correct. So if they were to leave anytime between signing on and the end of year 2, there could be some refund, but after the 24 months is expired, they would get nothing back. But if they move to campus, then we would apply the entry fee toward their unit price.
The full entry fee.
The full entry fee, yes.
Yes, thanks. And the next one I think is also coming your way. I think you mentioned that members are able to accrue, I think it was 5 days a year, up to 10 days total of healthcare. And the question is, what does the healthcare include, which is accrued?
So when we refer to healthcare, is if somebody needed to rehab and skilled nursing, for example, they would come in and it would be basically free for up to 10 days. Or if they were to get sick or something and they needed 24-hour care, they could come to campus to skilled nursing. Or if they needed memory care for a short time, they probably could go to memory care as well. So that's what we mean by healthcare.
All right, thank you. For either, well, really, I'm going to say both Ben and Kevin, in your early advantage program, does your monthly fee go up each year like you would normally increase monthly fees? Ben, I see your head shaking yes.
So we have kept our fee at $575 for, well, basically since inception. There is a concern that once you get too high, is there pushback from residents? We don't want to get to the point that we think we're charging too much. But I will tell you from the get-go, we wanted to charge a lot more. Our actuaries actually talked us out of doing that because they said it wouldn't sell. But then when we had so much success, basically they said, gosh, you should have charged more. But some of our board members also pushed back thinking that we should charge more. So we're probably going to raise that fee at some point. But we wanted to really establish ourselves in the market and establish a reputation, which we have. So we probably will start moving those fees in accord with how we do our other monthly service fees. So good question.
All right, thank you. Ben, I believe this is for you, that you said for the early advantage program, members can jump the wait list. Could you describe what that means?
Yeah, so we've always had a system where unless you raise your hand and say, I want that particular apartment, which is a reservation, you're in the priority queue. But once you increase your commitment by paying the 10% reservation fee, that's your apartment. So when you get serious, you pay your 10% fee, and now you've leapfrogged ahead. Of course, somebody could have trumped you if they were interested in the same apartment earlier. But with Early Advantage, we treat it like a reservation. And so if they're willing to put that money down, they have priority as if they've already reserved the apartment. So they have and we find probably most of the people who are buying our Early Advantage are probably not buying the future healthcare assurance I thought I was selling. They're probably buying bridge insurance to make sure there's no healthcare event when they're planning on moving in within the year and marketing their house. And they have a little better apartment selection because they were willing to make that 10% plus fee sooner for that style of apartment and reserve it. And so I have opportunity from listening to Kevin to take a look and see, do we want to embed some services that they may or may not use to drive that monthly fee a little bit higher? So hats off to Kevin on that.
All right. Have these programs impacted the age of your residents at move-in? I assume that could go either way. Either people stay at home longer and move in older, or they enable you to attract younger people who experience the community moving younger. Are you seeing any difference?
I don't think we have enough people through our program at 120 and 57 active to answer that question. I can tell you, I think that's why we haven't sold more, because our sales counselors are worried about that. Our sales counselors say, we're not going to get those 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds you want. Our average age of entry dropped down to 76. We're not going to get the 50% below that. If you make it easy for them to come and dine and use everything and their healthcare anxiety is gone, I don't buy that. And we don't have enough data to answer that question. I don't buy that, because if they come to campus and they have a positive experience and we're communicating with them well and we're showing them how much fun they have living in a truly resort style senior living community, we ought to be able to get them to move. And so anyway, I think that's a debate that I can't say I know who's right about. I just have two different instincts on my campus.
Okay. Kevin, how about you? Have you seen a change in the average age?
We've really not seen a change in the average age. When we first implemented the Early Advantage program, we were running still around 80 at the average entry age for moving in. I will tell you that most folks that come to the Early Advantage program are somewhat younger, but it's not changed the age of move-in coming onto campus. I also should tell you that in the 40 new homes that we're building, 27 of the folks that are on the Early Advantage program are some that are moving in. Those 27 folks are moving into our newest product. They will bring our average age down a little bit because they're in the upper 70s, but by and large, it's not changed the overall entry age, and it's not affected our ability to sell our units and to add to our waiting list, because that's still occurring. So I think early on, folks were concerned that if we do this, we're going to somehow decimate people moving into independent living. That simply has not happened.
Hey, one quick thing I'll throw in. I'm experimenting with trying to influence our marketing counselors away from this fear by, I'll pay them the same commission for an Early Advantage as a full contract. Then I'll pay them the same commission again when they sell it. So now their monetary interest is to get a twofer through this process instead of worrying so much about people delaying their move.
Okay, I'm trying to clarify one question here, but let me go to a regulatory one. Are regulators in either Virginia or North Carolina limiting the number of people who can be in these programs? And what are they basing those limits on?
So I would say in North Carolina, the only limitation question that was posed by the Department of Insurance when we were doing this was to ensure that we have proper capacity. And they basically said that if you have too many folks in your program and you cannot guarantee them health care, and it's time for them to take health care, then you have to find a place for them to go. And it's on you. So there's a concern that at that point, if you've oversold and you have undercapacity, then you could have an issue. but it was never imposed to us that you had to cap it at a certain number. We self-imposed a cap at 120 people. Our actuaries basically said 100 is a good number, working number, but we chose to go above that. I don't think we go above 120 at any one point, but that's where we are.
All right, Kevin? I'm sorry, Ben?
Yeah, same issue. It's only capacity. You're selling something, assurance of something that you're not going to have the capacity to provide. And I'd say the selection of your actuary is important because the real data shows only a 4% utilization instead of a 20% utilization of the nursing home. Think about it. These are people who didn't want to come to your community, some of them anyway, and they have the means to buy home health and stay where they are. So, but that's a really important thing. Now, the way we chose to address it is, we have about 30 beds that are skilled nursing, heat, knees and hips and all of that. And we could scale that back, pretty easily up and down to take care of that. So that gave us some extra capacity. And then we are building redoing our assisted living and building a separate tower for that. And we designed all those floors, spent the money for the 8-foot corridors so they could be converted to skilled nursing. So, with this program in mind and future flexibility to take care of lots of people who may not live here as independent living people.
All right, so we have 2 last questions. So let's see if we can get to those, and then we will wrap up. First is, do any of you have local villages, that's sort of the village concept, that offer services to members while they remain in their home? And if so, do you have a relationship with them? Nancy, I don't know whether, since you've worked with so many different communities, if you've run into any of them that have villages that are either competitors or, whatever the opposite of competitor is, the cooperative.
Yeah. So not in this senior options and Westminster Canterbury at Home role, but I have worked with lots of village type models in a previous life. And it is a wonderful way. And I think Ben kind of touched on it in his vision of touching and Kevin as well, touching the NORCs, the naturally occurring retirement communities, the condo communities, the senior high-rise rentals, and having a relationship with them and providing some services on site to kind of build your brand and build their knowledge of your services. So I have done that, but not in this current position.
All right, thank you. And the last question, I inadvertently was trying to type a question back to them to clarify it, and I wound up deleting the question. But I believe the question that asked for the Early Advantage program, are residents, and they put residents in quotation marks, using the Early Advantage program for respite services. What I believe that meant, I was trying to clarify, and I'm sorry I messed that up, was by residents in quotation marks, I believe they meant members of the Early Advantage program who therefore have, a lot of rights and privileges that residents have. Do they wind up using the services that are available then on site for a respite type of program? Have either of you experienced that?
I don't think that we've really experienced anything like that at this point. So
Yeah, we don't include a number of complimentary days in our healthcare. We just include, for fee for service, you get a 10% discount if you come here. We just agree that you will have space when you come. So no, I think I'm guessing the questioner was concerned about maybe Kevin's free days that are bundled in this, and whether somebody says I have the flu or I want respite, or a well spouse goes away and joins the Early Advantage program for a modest fee and then takes advantage of those respite days. I'm not sure. I know some retirement communities have contracts like that, and where 10 days are included and they have to fight the battle. Does the flu qualify and all that stuff? But anyway.
All right, great. Yeah, and she followed up with saying, yes, that's what she meant. And respite services are so hard to find. So I guess she was seeing a potential for a program like this to be a way to provide respite. So that's another interesting idea there as well.
I think that's the way you get to those higher monthly fees that are palatable, as you start layering in some goodies that, they may or may not use.
Absolutely.
Great. All right. Well, we are at 1:31, 1 minute past our target. And thank you. We have well over 90 people still with us who hung on this whole time. So thank you very much for that. And thank you again, Ben, Nancy, and Kevin, for sharing your expertise and thoughts and insights today. This has been really good, and I think it'll be really helpful to a lot of people. So thank you all.
It was a pleasure.
Indeed it was. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob.
Great. And with that, we will wrap up for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Bye-bye.